In the Trenches with Ryan Roxie.
Hello, hello, hello. Ryan Roxie here, and welcome to another, just another. This is a special one. This is a secret sauce episode of In the Trenches with Ryan Roxie. How you doing? As you know, if you are watching on our Facebook Live or on our YouTube Live, just hit that subscribe button right down there, wherever I'm pointing my finger or wherever our producer Vic will put the arrow at. And if you are in your car listening to us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or any of those, pull your car over because you're going to want to watch this one. You're going to want to get in the chat, and you are going to want to really listen to this one today because, folks, whenever I have a guitar player on, I get excited. But on top of that, this guitar player, this guy is something special. It really is, because that on In the Trenches that we try to dive deep into what drives our artists and our entertainers to keep them inspired, keep them creative. But I don't really have to do that today because with nearly 40 album releases, 10 million albums sold, our guest today is no doubt one of the world's most well-known and successful solo guitarists. So all that, and he's from New York. So will you please welcome Into the Trenches, Joe Satriani. Hey.
Hey, how's it going? How are you doing today?
All that, and I still said it wrong. I said Joe Satriani. I said Joe Satriani. There you go.
Oh, yeah. That's okay. They say it all different ways around the world. It's okay.
How you doing, man? You holding up?
I'm good. I am good today. It's a little crazy out there. I'm in San Francisco. I looked at my air quality index and it was in the red. So I'm staying inside today. Wow. We got lots of fires here, and the world's going crazy. It's a good thing we got music, and we can talk about guitars and forget about what's going on out there.
I always say that that we never mention the C word inside this little dome that we have because all that stuff is out there. But no doubt, I grew up from the Bay Area. You've been in the Bay Area since the late 70s. So
that's right. Yeah.
Pretty much stayed out there and made a life, made a career, built an empire. And we're going to go through all of that stuff because the first part of the podcast is always, you got to go back to go forward. And I just like to give a little bit of history about who you are, because I know there's a lot of people already that know your history, but might not know the little intricate details. And I have a little inside information because being again that I grew up in the Bay Area, I knew you from your earlier bands. But even before that, legend has it that you started playing guitar. You were initially into sports. That's what you were into. Were you a football guy? Or baseball guy?
I wasn't very good at any of it. I was just enthusiastic. I was just a little kid growing up on Long Island. So I went to a public high school called Carl Place High School, and I did, wrestling, the fitness team. There used to be a fitness team back then. This is ancient history, though. I think my high school
That's
won
all gone out the door in America now. Fitness teams,
but I think they were. It was national, and we won 4 years in a row, so it was a thing. If you were able-bodied to try to get on the fitness team. So my brother and myself were both on the team. We played baseball. We were on the baseball team, on the football team. But when you're around 14 years old, that's when kids who are going to be big start getting big. And kids like me who were born to play guitar, it starts to be obvious, and it was harder to play against your fellow 14-year-olds because some of them were just huge. Yeah. I was into that, but I was, I started playing drums when I was 9. So I was already thinking of subverting the norm, and trying to create my own reality as a musician, but it didn't click in until the tragedy of Jimi Hendrix dying. And I did find out as I was heading out to practice. And I turned around, I went to the coach's office and said, I'm quitting. Jimi Hendrix has died. I'm going to be a guitar player.
So the
And
legend is true. That's amazing to hear that, because I'm a little bit like you. I started off, well, my first instrument was the trumpet, because my father played the trumpet, and then I realized very quickly that there wasn't a career in rock star Trumpism. Oh wait, hey, whoa, being a trumpet player as a rock star, and then I switched to drums. I had a 5-piece Tama kit, and then it was like the guitar that was always laying on the couch that I just kind of, when I finally put everything down, I said, you know what, that's the path, because the guitar is the right path for me. And again, like you, probably on my tippy toes, I'm 5'8", I think, and that's full grown still to this day. And now I'm shrinking as I get old. Why do we shrink as we get older as guitar players? Damn it.
Yeah. Who knows? But hey, you know what? I want to point out Michael Anthony, trumpet player as well. And I got to say, you guys who learn how to play horn can conceptualize music in your head better than those of us who start on an instrument where you can look at it. It's different. You're a piano player. You're used to the left to right. You're a guitar player, a little convoluted, but still we can look at the shapes. But a horn player, it's really all in your brain, isn't it? Because these fingerings are,
and there's not that many of them. That's the cool thing, is that, with the trumpet, there's not that. There's a lot of other grace notes, especially saxophone always confused me. My grandfather played saxophone, and he played the melody sax and stuff, because jazz has been part of your upbringing. Like, once you decided to take guitar seriously, jazz music was kind of like the sort of focus. And I mean, there was some amazing jazz players. You had Billy Bauer that you studied with, and Lenny Tristano. Is that?
That's right. That right? Yeah. Yeah, okay. We say Tristano on Long Island. Tristano. Yeah. Well, I grew up youngest of 5 kids, so I watched from the side of the room, as my older sisters, my older brother had the most fun late 50s all the way through the 60s. And as they started to leave the house in the late 60s, early 70s, I would inherit all their records. And that just became my foundation, along with my parents, who were jazz age kids, all the beautiful jazz music that they had collected and played throughout my entire childhood in the house. Even when they had lots of parties, it was all jazz. And so, I heard Wes Montgomery and Coltrane and Miles Davis, and all the way up to the Creed Taylor records, Stanley Turrentine.
No one ever talks about that. No one ever talks about, being the youngest of a big family. They always talk about how, when they're talking about being the youngest of the family, they talk about that they get the hand-me-down clothes, but they don't talk about the pros of it, which you get all the hand-me-down records, right?
Yeah,
good stuff. That's a good point to make, man. So everyone that's in the chat that's the youngest of any family, you got all the good records. How about that?
Yeah, and it was it was physical back then. It was literally, stacks of scratch 45s, but I loved them. I loved all the Beatles and the Stones, Dave Clark 5, all the Motown, James Brown, all of it. It's I just have great memories of sitting there with a portable record player in the corner and just playing that stuff over and over again, thinking this
maybe headphones like this, like big old 70s headphones, I call them,
Yes.
Pioneer headphones, but the cool thing is I have a 15-year-old daughter, and what her biggest wish was for Christmas last year was a vinyl player. So I love that it's coming back. I mean, have you been able to re-release a lot of your albums on vinyl lately?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I'm glad you said that, because I just happened to have this
shameless plug. I love it.
Shameless plug. Look at that. Who is that guy?
Is that Shapeshifting? Is that the newest one that came out in 2020? Okay.
Yes, it came out April 10th. What a lucky time to release a record. But people need music. You know what I mean? We're musicians. It's our job to make music for people. So I along with the guys at Sony, we just said, no, this is our job. We're going to make music and we're going to release it. So we've just been moving forward, although we've been stuck in our little respective homes and rooms doing it. But Legacy Sony has been really wonderful in releasing almost all of my catalog on vinyl. And we usually take Record Store Day or something like that to sort of usher in the new one that we're putting out. And they find great pressing plants, and we released a really fat, beautiful sounding vinyl. So
well, I'm going to talk about Shapeshifter. Cool. I'm going to talk about Shapeshifter a little bit, and especially the newest one that you have which is the Stripped X3, which actually has a Shapeshifter on it as well as part of the backing tracks. We'll talk a little bit about that, but I mean, a little bit of controversy is Shapeshifter your 17th or 18th studio album? Because
I don't know, but the first controversy is that when I chose this script, I realized people would not realize that it actually says Shapeshifting. Not Shapeshifter.
Oh, of course. There it is. I'm the one.
Yes.
I stand guilty. Shapeshifting.
No, you can't imagine how many times I've had to correct people on that. We should have done it in block letters, right? But
no, I have it in big font on my notes right here. It says Shapeshifting, and I'm still going Shapeshifter. Yeah, well, maybe I'm just thinking of an Electro-Harmonix phase shifter.
Oh, yes, that. I know. Isn't that funny? Guitar players, everything is funneled through our pedal memory.
Oh, man. that was my first pedal that I got. That was my first sort of cool effect, like one that I got was a small stone phase shifter. I think they had two of them. They had maybe different. They had small stone, and then they had maybe it came along with the big muff. There was a Electro-Harmonix made a bunch of stuff back in those days, and they were all kind of 70s and kind of cool like that.
My first one was the big muff, and I think that my second pedal may have been that big Maestro phase shifter, the black one with the 3 buttons on it. Sounded beautiful, noisy as all hell, but
they were always noisy. Nice. Yeah, I can still hear it. The little big muff. That was the one I had because the big muff, and then they came up with a smaller version called the little big muff. Imagine that.
That's right.
So Joe, I'm impressed with your business acumen since the beginning, because you're studying school, you're studying music with these jazz teachers, but then you start teaching guitar right away. You're going to school at I think what was this college at? 5 Towns College? Was that it?
Well, I started teaching when I was still in high school, so that would be Carr Place High School. I was taking lessons, music theory lessons, actually classes from a guy named Bill Westcott, a young Juilliard graduate who was just really brilliant. And I went through Bill's classes as well as Steve Vai, who was about 3 years younger than me. There were a few
you guys
of us.
went to the same high school. I didn't know that going through this research that you guys actually went to the same high school. And did you end up teaching him some stuff? Obviously, later on, your whole catalog of musicians that you have groomed and the ones that you have actually been your proteges, if you will. You've been their mentor. The list is crazy. I mean, I'll go on into that for a little bit, but I'm impressed that you're learning from the jazz guys, but then you're passing it on to everyone that's up and coming and all these.
Yeah, it was a beautiful time to learn music for two funny reasons that seemed to be opposing. One was I had this opportunity in this public high school to get a world-class university music education from this Juilliard graduate who was stuck in this little public school in the middle of Long Island and only had 3 students in his class. So the attention I got, especially in my last year of high school, where I graduated a half year early. So I took 2 of every class every day for 6 months and graduated early. But
were you 17 when you graduated?
I guess,
probably. Had to have been about 17 because that's the age I was. Because I did, like, when I hear your story, I'm like going, well, damn, if I would have had everything except the actual talent that you had at playing guitar at that age, everything, we're on the same pace.
I benefited from the funniest set of circumstances. I did take about, I think, 3 lessons from Billy Bauer, and that happened only because my mother was talking to somebody and just mentioned that her youngest kid was looking for guitar lessons and somebody knew somebody. I wound up when I graduate. Well, first of all, so during that period where I'm just playing Black Sabbath and Zeppelin in my high school bands.
That was me, Jumpin' Jack Flash and all that stuff.
Yeah. It was great fun. A few years younger than me is Steve Vai. So we've known each other since we were kids. And the singer in my band had a younger brother who was the singer in Steve's band. So there was this funny little connection between the two of us. I taught Steve for about 2.5, 3 years while I was in high school. When I spent almost one semester at Five Towns College, did not get along with the staff at that school, and then just went out on the road. I was in a disco band at the time. But in the interim between that stage of being at Five Towns and then going out on the road, I did take a few months of lessons from Lenny Tristano, the father of cool jazz, one of the greatest musical figures of the last century. And he did sort of reorient myself about how to be a musician, how to practice, how to face up to what you think you know and what you do know and what you don't know, how to approach playing and music as a lifelong quest,
In other words, he was a little bit strict as well.
Crazy strict. I swear I had a couple of lessons that were no longer than 45 seconds, because if you made a mistake, he would get up, he'd walk over to his Braille accounting book and just sit there. And that meant you had to go and lay down the money and leave. And you'd leave and there would be like a walk of shame, because you'd walk out of the door and in the hallway, there'd be 6 other students waiting there, and they'd look at you like, don't worry about it. Happens to all of us.
Did that carry on to your students? Would if I was to interview any of your other students, and like I say, I will mention those names in just a little bit, folks, because the list is very impressive. Would they think you were a strict student, or would they think you were
some of them? Yeah. I mean, if like I had students who came in and they'd say, I want to be great. I want to be the greatest I can be. I want to be the greatest guitar player. I want to be famous, that kind of stuff. Then I'd say, okay, I'm just going to turn the screws. I did teach 8-year-old kids who would come in with action figures and put them on the amp, so of course I wouldn't lean on them. I taught, doctors, lawyers, race car drivers, you name it, construction workers who would come in, dirty with injured hands after a hard day work. And they just want to play some Creedence Clearwater. So I'm not going to lean on them. They just,
were you tough on Steve Vai though? But because you saw that, it
was impossible. He was so good. Every time that I would teach him something, he'd come back and he'd have it down, and I'd be looking at him thinking, next week he'll do that better than me. I'm guaranteed, So with Steve, it was like I was just barely ahead of him. I mean, I think I'd only been playing about a year, maybe a year before him. So it wasn't like I was an advanced player. I was just a little bit ahead. And
you guys were just pushing each other up, I think.
Yeah, he was so much fun because he's just the natural musician and he's really driven. That's always the case, if the student, like you take Kirk Hammett, he came already, he could play great. He really was a good musician, naturally could pick up a guitar, make music, and put a smile on people's faces, right? That's our job, right?
Kurt is only the guitarist in Metallica, folks. in case of those of you that just, you saw Joe just say the name and slide off his tongue, but no, it's the guitarist of Metallica, and here he is teaching him, and
he worked really hard. He showed up as much as he could. Sometimes his mom would come to pay for the lessons. I mean, this is real neighborhood stuff, you know what I mean? But he worked really hard, and the thing that really helped, besides his obvious talent, was that he knew what he wanted, and so he could express to me, this, Joe, this is what I like. I like these players. How do I do that? What are they doing? What are the ingredients? And that's really my job, is to provide the ingredients and not to affect the student's style. I don't want them to play like me. At the time, as you mentioned, I was in the Squares, so it was a completely different style from all my students. Most of my students were young, and they were about to change the world with thrash metal and
that whole scene coming out of the Bay Area.
Yeah. So it was very exciting.
So by the time you're teaching Kurt, you had already moved from the East Coast. You moved to California, and this is basically late 70s, early 80s that you start teaching, and you decide to move to Berkeley. Berkeley, California. And for those of you that don't know, Berkeley is a very esoteric place. It's like I used to go as a kid. I grew up in a little bit more East Bay. I grew up in Pleasanton, right? But I would go to Berkeley because I go to Rasputin's Records because it was cool. It was a place that had all the bootleg records. I remember getting my Cheap Trick bootlegs there because they were my Beatles back at that point. And in Berkeley is a very, for lack of a better term, back in those days, it's very progressive. It's very almost hippie-ish a little bit, and you fit right in with that, right? I mean, because even to this day, you still have a very cool, mellow type of Zen vibe, I feel.
Well, I wound up there by accident. Really, it's because my two oldest sisters had landed there. They were both professional artists, and so they reported back to their younger brother that Berkeley, California was a crazy place and you could just come and do whatever you want. And I think a lot of us from New York were really trying to figure out how to escape, right? And I already, I'd been on tour with a disco band. I'd seen enough of the East Coast as a young kid. I've been working in bars since I was 14, and so I felt like I need a vacation from the East Coast. And so I go to Berkeley, and of course, the first time you go to California, if you're from the East Coast, it's the most exotic experience ever. And the sense of freedom and how you feel like you can really spread your wings, it's really intoxicating. I spent about 6 months in Japan. I came back and I finally settled around 77. I thought I'm just going to stay here in Berkeley. And I was there for about 12 years before coming here to the city right across the bridge. But had a wonderful time. I had an apartment right across the street from this little guitar store called Secondhand Guitars, owned by a guy named Jim Larson. And
that wasn't that far from Rasputin's, if I remember
yes,
correctly.
Yeah.
It was pretty close, right?
It was, yeah. Small town, Berkeley, that
not
area
that far
Berkeley
from
there.
Keystone, Berkeley, as well.
Yes,
the
Keystone maybe about with the pole. The pole well, right?
That's what I said.
You can play slide guitar on. I've done that many times.
It's not a weird gesture, folks. For those of you watching on the on our YouTube channel, everybody that does Keystone Berkeley does that thing because it had a pole in the middle of the stage.
Yes,
I saw Motley Crue there. I think on the first. They're Too Fast for Love tour. It was 1982 or something like that. 82 or 83. It's right before I split and moved down to Los Angeles and decided to go for my thing. But Keystone Berkeley, Keystone Palo Alto, and the Stones. Those were all clubs, and we'll talk about that because at that time you're touring in this, or not touring, but you formed this band called the Squares. And for those of you folks that are not familiar with the Squares. The Squares, I have a personal love for because my band at that time, oh my God, you have that out, you have that CD as well. I was happy to find that you guys released the album because I've been looking for those songs for years on the dark web. I've literally gone down there. Folks, the Squares were the perfect blend between the Police and Van Halen and perhaps the Beatles or Isley Brothers. They all sang. They sang great. It was power pop, but heavy pop songs. All I can tell you is go check it out because I know that you.
Wow, look at that.
I know that you played with Jeff Campitelli and another former Italian that I'm sure you've worked with on other records. I think you worked with him on some of your solo records, and you had Andy Milton on the vocals as well and bass. And I remember this power trio, folks, because I opened up for them at a club in Danville called The Stage many a time, and that's when I studied Joe's rig before. Joe didn't know I was studying his rig, but he was the one that turned me on to the 2 Marshall half stacks and an Echoplex and I think a Boss CE1 course that drove the two together. And that was and you had a Strat, like a kind of a cream Strat, I think I don't even remember.
I had a black one and a red one. Yeah. They were put together from parts. Yeah. Yeah. There's the black one. I still have that one. That one's still, yeah.
And then you then you guys in the Squares, during, at least in those days, you would all wear trench coats. Was that? Am I close? Did you?
No, I mean, that would
maybe a couple gigs?
probably just a phase. Maybe it was a phase. I think Andy looked pretty good Andy was like 6'1", so he looked good in a big long coat. What's funny is you mentioned that I have one of the Squares Marshall heads that was stolen from living in Berkeley was crazy. It was a rough town in many ways, and we rehearsed in a pretty bad part of town. And one night, all of our gear got stolen. That head right there, of a friend of mine, he was a fan, Greg Montgomery. He lives up in Eugene, Oregon. This goes back a couple of years. He meets me at a meet and greet, and he says, "I think I have your Marshall." And he shows me all these pictures of this 100-watt head, and it's got remnants of orange paint all over it. He tells me this story about he was a fan of my rig, as you described it. And one day he works in the IT or something like that. He's talking to a friend. He wants to put together a rig that's just like, Joe's from the old days. And the guy says, "Oh, I have this head, but it's orange." So he buys the head from the guy, and he says, "I got to get rid of the orange paint." He starts to strip it, and he sees the Square stencil.
Get out.
And then
amazing.
He compares the cracked plexi in the front to all the pictures he took of us playing at the Keystone Berkeley Square, Keystone Palo Alto,
Yeah.
And it's the one, and the guy gives it to me. He finally, after all these years, he gives it back to me, and I've been using it on the albums ever since. Oh, this you're showing that illustration. It's my son's birthday today. Zizi Satriani turns 28 today. So happy birthday,
Zizi. Hey, there you go.
Anyway, so that's the head. And I'm so happy that I still have it. That's one of the things cool. I still have from the Squares.
I also remember the fact you turned, because you were one of those bands that I looked up to. So I remember that you had those half stacks in Anvil Road cases, because that was an important thing, that you have an Anvil Road case because you wanted to make your Marshall amp heavier. If you wanted to turn a 100-pound amp into a 200-pound amp, just get an Anvil Road case for it. That was perfect.
Oh God.
Try fitting that in the back of a Ford Courier. I did that for many years.
I made the mistake of being the guy in the band that owned the van. And so I had to show up first, and I got home last every gig.
That's usually the drummer. That's usually the drummer. That's funny. So Northern Cal, you're growing up in Northern Cal. You get to play the Squares. It kind of ran its course. I understand that. I mean, I was such a huge fan. I thought it was, again, another smart business decision. You had decided to start this band with your brother-in-law. He would be the manager. He would sort of write the lyrics, and then you'd form this band, and you had success. Maybe two before your time or whatever, but it didn't pan out as much as you thought it would. But you still get asked by the Greg Kihn band at that point to them, which is another great Bay Area band, folks. If you're not familiar with Northern Cal rock, these are all straight ahead, great rock and roll, pop, hooky songs. And how was your experience like with Greg Kihn?
Well, we had opened for them quite a bit, so we were lucky. The Squares, we were just not successful, and we tried the hardest. We rehearsed like crazy, but my guess is the songs weren't right for the time, and we weren't as good as our comrades, our competitors.
I thought you were. I mean, who were your competitors back then? I mean, because in the Bay Area, do you remember bands like? Were you playing with bands like Bonnie Hayes and the Wild Combo? Were you playing with? Benny and the Jets. Was that another one that might have been?
Yes,
great
the Lloyds, the Lloyds, all of them. And
Eric Martin.
The thing is that musicians, we compete with each other all the way to the top, because when here's a funny thing. So John Carter, who was Sammy's manager before his untimely passing, he was one of the Chickenfoot managers. He was also A&R at Capitol, and he turned the Squares down many times. We often laughed about that as we became very close friends later in life. But from his perspective, when he goes to see a brand new band, that band is competing against whoever is number one. So in effect, all of us, you and me included in our respective bands back in the early 80s, we were competing with the Police and Van Halen and Ozzy and all of them.
Yeah.
And so the competition thing really doesn't matter. It's just, you just didn't win. And so that was the end of that. Now, I think Greg Kihn did win. They were a platinum selling band. They had a couple of really successful singles, and they were a crazy band, that's for sure. I turned them down 2 years prior when they had to get rid of their one of their guitar players. I forget who was bailing.
Right.
But here's the drama around this whole thing is I decided to, using a credit card that got mailed to me just anonymously from a bank in, I think, North Carolina or something like that, to max out the credit.
I would imagine Wilmington, Delaware.
So whatever. Anyway, I didn't even question it. I just went to Hyde Street and I said, I'll prepay everybody. So what's the deal? Can I get 50% off on all the studio time and everything? I got my first full-length album, Not of This Earth, recorded. I was just about to go to manufacturing, release it on my own label, Rubina Records. And Steve Vai said, please let me send it to this nutcase, Cliff Coltrari at Relativity Records, because he's going to put out Flexible. And if he's going to sign me with Flexible, he definitely would sign you for Not of This Earth. So it did work out. But the problem was that before that happened, I was in debt for that $5,000 that I really couldn't come up with at the time. And that week, when it was going to go to a collection agency, I got a call from Steve and Greg from the Greg Kihn Band saying, please say yes this time. We're desperate. Come down to the studio, help us finish the album. And so, of course, I said yes.
You need an advance of $5,000.
they in 3 hours, all my problems were solved. I was in a band. I had employment for a year. They paid off all the problems that I had dealing with the recording of Not of This Earth. And suddenly I realized, wow, this is gonna work out. And I was able to hold on long enough to get Not of This Earth released about a year later on Relativity Records. And about a month later, I signed on to do the next series of records, the first of which was going to be Surfing with the Aliens. So it was fortuitous, but it came at a very tumultuous time, a very difficult time where I didn't really know where, if I was going to get a break or where the next dollar was going to come from. So very exciting time. Really exciting.
Would you say your career was in jeopardy?
Yeah,
that's a Greg Kihn joke. All right, you got to go real deep inside and be a Greg Kihn fan to actually appreciate that, folks. Honestly, I didn't write that stuff. You can't write that stuff. We're here with Joe Satriani. I would like to say, band member, but you are the guitar. You're a solo guitarist, but you've also been in so many big bands. We've talked about, trust me, I'm so happy that the Squares record is out right now, but the ones that the people perhaps in the chat right now, and you're going to check out the Squares right there in the chat, aren't you? But the thing is, you've also played with Greg Kihn, and I'm looking at Mick Jagger's first solo record as well. So things are clicking on the first tour, and then all of a sudden you're associated with a ton of great bands, and then obviously you're putting out your solo stuff, all in between, making this huge name for yourself. But you've been associated with huge bands as well, because Chickenfoot, who you just mentioned, with Sammy Hagar. You just said Sammy, but folks, that's Sammy Hagar. Chickenfoot goes on to make 2 records, and they have superstars in it. You got Sammy Hagar, you got Michael Anthony, Chad Smith on the first album. I believe that Kenny Aronoff has been your drummer since. Perhaps maybe there's maybe a reunion in the works at one point.
You never know. You never know.
You never know. Never say never.
Right? It's funny you mentioned, you're jogging my memory about, just that moment when I got that call from Greg Kihn, and that was, I was teaching at the time at Secondhand Guitars. I remember Jim Larson saying, hey, the guys from Greg's on the phone, Greg Kinben. And back then I never would have thought that I would have been, spending a year playing with Mick Jagger, 6 months on tour with Deep Purple. Certainly I never thought I'd be, in a band with Chad Smith, Michael Anthony, and Sammy Hagar. And these things, it's so odd how they happen. But it's like what I told a lot of my students at the time, who had questions about how do you become famous? They're always, how do I become famous? Right? And I always say,
what is that secret? What is that special sauce that gets you to that point? Right?
I always say I have good news and bad news. I said the bad news is there's no reward for good behavior. So I said you could practice like crazy, and get a good haircut and a good lawyer, and just that no one knocks at the door, and that's all there is to it. So you better love what you do, because that's the payoff. But there's no reward really. But the other thing I'd say is you have to prepare for good luck, because you have no idea how it's going to arrive. It just might arrive in the weirdest package that you could have never imagined. But if you're not ready to show what you got, then that opportunity passes by in a split second. So, that call from Greg Kinn was funny. I just said yes before I even knew what it meant. And I drove across town, not very far, to go to Fantasy Studios back then, down in the flats of Berkeley. I walk in there, I plug in, I start tuning. I'm playing over a song I never heard before. We get to the end of it and they say, "We got it, Joe. That's great. Let's go to another song." And I realized, wow, this is how it might happen. I'm going to be recording on an album, and they're just taking first takes. They're not even letting me listen to the material and plan or take out the appropriate pedal. They're just like winging it. I recorded.
But I think it goes back to your preparation, man. Your preparation that you learned, and you're already prepared. So what you think might be the first take, they're thinking like, shit, this is the vibe already, because you've already in your mind prepared that.
And it goes back to ear training in high school. Bill Westcott training my ear and, teaching me relative pitch and telling me, look, you may at 21, it may turn out you don't have fingers of a virtuoso, but your brain can keep going. Your musical brain, the powerful musician inside of you, can keep going into old age. So you just work that. And he was right, because you don't know what's going to happen to you physically when you're a young person, but you can really bet on your musical mind to carry you through any physical impediment you might come up against.
When you're at that music store teaching those students, and now I'm looking forward to rewinding this podcast for myself, just so I can get some of those last nuggets of information, and all of you should in the chat as well. But this is sort of information, golden type of stuff that you're telling these names that you're teaching. And correct me if I'm wrong, at this point, are you teaching the likes, we already talked about Kirk Hammett from Metallica, but Dave Bryson of Counting Crows, right? Kevin Cadogan from Third Eye Blind, Larry Ladonde of Primus. You have Alex from Testament. I mean, these names are just like, they're huge bands that you're able to not just mentor, but then you move on and show as example of like what you end up doing. And at the end of the day, there's a good picture. That's Vic, our producer, always comes up with some really great photos. He combs the internet. He goes on the dark web sometimes and to check out some of these things. But it's incredible that you've been able to have this business mindset of being a teacher and a mentor, but also keeping your eye on your career as well. And it all comes back, and it all fast forwards to you with your association with my boss, Alice Cooper. You and Steve Vai end up trading solos on like Hey Stupid, Feed My Frankenstein. How did that whole thing come together, and how was your experience with Alice?
Well, see that picture there, that is a real wonderful Spinal Tap moment, because my guitar actually never made a sound on that particular live show. It was a moment of humility where you get invited out for an encore and the amp doesn't work. And no matter what all the techs did, they couldn't get the amp to work. And Alice had to start the song. There's thousands of people waiting for the song. But besides that, I have to tell you that when I was in high school, I was suspended and thrown out for a week because I did an impersonation of Alice Cooper, shirtless, covered in blood, and my friend's boa snake, and I terrorized the theater full of younger kids, just in an effort to try to get my friend elected president. I mean, we were completely unelectable as kids.
Did you play the song "Elected" by Alice Cooper?
I think it was, he had just come out with that because he was in town playing at the Long Island Coliseum that week. So when I appeared on stage and they're playing Alice Cooper and there I am, a lot of people thought it was Alice Cooper for a second. Because from far away, my really long, mid-70s hair, and I had the snake and everything. But explaining that to my parents was difficult. But I loved Alice Cooper. I used to see him. I saw him at the Long Island Coliseum. I had a great poster of him hanging himself in my bedroom, which, caused my family much grief because they were always worrying about me. But I just love Alice. It's just Alice. He always had amazing guitar players in his band. The music, it was always interesting. And I always got the joke. And so I've always been a really big fan. And when I got connected with him through Bob Pfeiffer, who I think had signed him to Hollywood Records, I think that was the connection. Or was it Epic? Was it Hollywood or Epic? Maybe it was Epic.
He signed Hollywood. He had Hollywood Records, like basically right during the time I was with Alice when I joined in '96. So it had to have been Epic before, because Bob Pfeiffer has been around. Bob Pfeiffer, folks, has been around longer than rock and roll, I think.
Anyway, so he got us connected, and I had this distinct pleasure of playing on 4 or 5 tracks or 6 or something on the Hey Stupid record. It was just, for me, it was so important just to make that connection, to work with him. And him, he's just an amazing human being, a great artist. And we're lucky to have him. And it's so cool that he's still giving us, performance, and music and art.
I thank you, Joe. Because I've studied your music for years off those albums, and I've always tried to make it my own after getting frustrated trying to learn your parts verbatim. Because no one can play that sort of off of Feed by Frankenstein. The only two people that can really play that sort of solo off each other is you and Steve. I mean, there's just no doubt that's the two of you, and we do our best to come up with, make it our own, but we always try and put that spirit of that time in. So thank you for that for years.
Oh, you're welcome.
So I'm wondering if that's if that is one of those 40 album releases, and I don't think it is. I don't think your appearances are of the almost 40 albums that you've had in the release and the 10 million sales. I really don't think it is, because folks, you've done so much of this stuff on your own, whether it's with solo albums or some of the bands that you've done, but it's mostly been solo records. The newest one is Shapeshifting. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that, because you put that out this year, but at the same time, you've actually released something for the fans on Satriani.com, which we're going to talk about and give you when we put out your socials and stuff. But you put out a new sort of concept called Stripped X3, which has the backing tracks of Shapeshifting, Black Swans and Wormhole Wizards, and Is There Love in Space. So 3 different albums, 3 different complete eras. But guys, if you haven't gone on to Satriani.com to check this out, whether you're a guitarist and you just want to hear these backing tracks, which is something special, and play over it yourself, or you just want to appreciate the people that appreciate Joe, you got to go check out this album. So tell us about both Shapeshifting and this new Striped X3.
So it goes back to a couple of years ago. Steve Vai, my good buddy, decided to put out the Vai Jewel box, and he started putting the backing tracks out. And I always joked with him that I was going to replace all the melodies and solos and release the album as a Joe Satriani record. But so I had this feeling like, well, it costs so much money to actually create the backing tracks. That's where you spend most of the time and money, is, you know, hiring all these musicians and the studio and everything. And the melody and solo bits go on just as everyone leaves, and you're running out of money, you know? So,
Right.
I
Kind of like
thought,
making
why
a
would
movie. The music always comes last. And when you're making a movie, it's like,
why would I be giving these things away? But then I started to think, no, this is totally different. I need to get over this. After I got over the you know, my conceptual problem of handing over to the fans these precious backing tracks, you know, that I practice to all the time, you know, when I'm getting ready for a tour, I got real excited about putting them together. And as you noted, you know, just sort of showing the fans the 3 different eras, and it illustrates how differently I approach each record. And I wanted them somehow to relate to each other, but at the same time, I did want to pick 3 that were wildly different in terms of where they were recorded, who was on the record, who was helping me produce, all that kind of stuff, and maybe conceptually what I was thinking about at the time in terms of the writing. The concept for getting other people to play on it was really the brainchild of my webmaster at Chime Interactive, John Lewini. And he kind of surprised me with this idea by saying, hey, we've asked, you know, Steve Vai and Phil Campbell and Phil Collin, Bumblefoot and Laurie, and all these people to come and just play whatever they want. In other words, don't try to play Joe, just do whatever you want, like it's a rehearsal backing track or something. And what we've been getting has been so cool because, you know, even like, of course, you can't do anything that Steve does because he's just like a wizard. He just, whatever he touches, he makes it his own thing, you know. But then there were these younger players like Alyssa and Joshua.
Alyssa
and
Day, and you had Bumblefoot on it as well, I saw.
You know, the stuff that they do, I'll never be able to do. So it was just so cool to see them like extrapolate, you know, on these simple structures and show me, you know, like there's so much more you can do. And that's really what it illustrates what these backing tracks are good for, really, is for exploration, you know, in many ways.
Well, you got to go check it out, folks, because it's on Satriani.com. I checked out a bunch of these clips because you can get a real nice taste of it. You can see Phil Collin playing from Def Leppard, as well as all the other names, even some, I want to say old schoolers, because I love Sammy, but Sammy gets a taste on it too as well. Sammy gets in on the action. And this is Striped X3. And I think the way you packaged it on your site, again, going back to that business mindset, is really smart. Because
I should show this. Then,
you have some of that.
Well, first of all,
that's the thing I want to talk about.
So here's the case, right? You snap it open. This is just a mock-up, you know, and then you get the guitar itself.
Whoa, that's a small Joe Satriani signature series, but it's not, folks. It's your USB stick that has the entire albums all on it, included with original liner notes and credits, and it's all packaged within a replica Joe Satriani Ibanez guitar in a custom case. So that's the first time people have seen it in the flesh.
That's right.
Holding it. I love it.
Yeah, I think they wanted me to make a little infomercial about it, but obviously I have no skill at this.
Think of us as like the infomercial of rock and roll right now, because that's quite awesome that you have that. And again, it goes back to that business mindset, where I have this segment in the podcast where I say taking care of business, because you've always had this good sense of how to make money in the music business. That's why you've been able to be so successful. You founded G3 in 1995. You know,
that's right. Yeah.
I did not know that. I knew that. I remember the first G3 coming out with Steve Vai and Eric Johnson and yourself, but you've been able to turn it into a franchise. And what was the idea behind that?
Oh, I was lonely. It was so funny. I came back in the middle of the 95 tour in support of the eponymous release, Joe Satriani, in 95. And I said, everything's great. Touring, packed houses, lots of work. I got artistic freedom. I said, but when do I get to hang out with my friends? I said, every time I call Steve Vai, I'm in New York, he's in Australia. If I call Lukather, he's in LA, I'm in London. I said, I never hang out. And I said, when I was a kid, I thought, when I'm a rock star, I'm just going to be hanging out with all the guitar players and we're just going to be having fun, partying, trading licks. And of course, it was nothing like that. I was just on my own. I was on a bus every night or in a hotel room. And so we
who does that, Joe? You know who does that? All that hanging out and all that camaraderie? Drummers.
That's right.
Drummers always do it, Damn
they do. They're very social.
Yeah.
So anyway, it took about 3 hours at the Bill Graham office there, but we finally came up with an idea. The difficulty was, of course, is that you can come up with a great idea, like 25 guitars in one night, but try to find a venue that you can rent, that can hold that many guitar players. And then if you've got all those guitar players and you've got to shove them into 7 to 11, which is really like 7:30 to 10:45, because that's the curfew.
Right.
People out there watching this may not know, but the artist rents the venue for the evening. That's kind of like what it is. And they have rules, which means you pull in now, you do your show, and then you get out. You
got a curfew. Yeah, everyone knows about the curfew that Axl Rose breaks every single night. But we don't.
It's very expensive, and unless you're a superstar act selling 40,000 tickets, you don't want to break that curfew, and you don't want to incur any overage. Especially if you're playing in a union place in New York City, it makes the whole tour insolvent, right? So we whittled it down, and we thought, well, we also won't be able to invite people if we say, hey, would you like to join the tour and play for 7 minutes? No one's going to say yes. Every artist is going to want to play whatever it is their set is to promote their new album, and to feel confident that they can reach their fans and give them the show they deserve. So we had to figure out what is the number of artists that would translate to a long enough set for each artist so that they all feel like they had a chance to deliver their goods to their fans. And 3 was the magic number. And so that's why we went with that. My manager
seems to have actually, it seems to actually have been to transcend into other tours, because a lot of guitar tours that have been under the same business model have that magic number of 3. I think I've actually done a tour called Planet Axe where it was 3 acts, 3 singer guitar players, singer songwriters that did a tour, and everyone did a little bit of a set. So I think 3 is that magic number for it. It is,
yeah. Everybody can do, let's say on the average 50 minutes with changeover. And then there's enough time at the end for all 3 artists to jam for a half hour at the end of the night. And
that's a great show.
It's so thrilling for me to stand next to these just incredible musicians every night and hanging out all day backstage, watching people practice. A lot of people don't know, when we walk off stage, the first thing we do is turn to each other and say, how did you do that? Like, that was so awesome when that happened. Wasn't that cool? We should do that longer. I mean, we're just like little kids who just got off a high school stage or something like that.
Yeah.
It is a great sense of camaraderie, and it's so unique because most of the time we're off on our own, just doing our set, night after night, city after city. It's the only opportunity where on a set schedule, guitar players get to really, trade and share and improvise, because we don't play each other's music. We're not trying to promote a single. We're actually playing classic music to celebrate the guitar with the audience. And I think that's the magic element that just sort of disarms the performers and the audience, and everybody can really have a great time.
Well, thank you, Joe, for coming up with that format, because it actually has been successful with a multitude of different types of tours, man. So good on you on that. So I think it's time that we move on, because at this point we say, let the people speak, but this time it's let the people speak secret sauce style, because it is a secret sauce episode, folks. And this is where we actually get people that have been following you, watching you, and want to actually be on screen with you to ask you a question. I would say face to face, but I'll say screen face to screen face. So we'll bring up Joey first, and we'll have him ask a question for you. I will disappear for a little while, but Joey, do you want to ask a question to Joe? And Joey, meet Joe. Joe, meet Joey.
Hey, Joey.
Hey.
How you doing, Joey?
Doing well. So I've been immersed the last week in a madness of listening to every single solo album from the beginning.
Wow.
And so I was trying to understand the evolution, right? Because instrumental music, it seems it's very different from normal rock music where you have the vocalist. And it's been a long time since you recorded under the solo name a song with vocals, like Flying in a Blue Dream, and you abandoned that at some point. So I wanted to understand that motivation, because there must have been a point in time when you decided there is this genre of clean guitar music that doesn't need vocals, and you created it and you sort of established it. So would love to hear if that was a business decision, if it was something that you just wanted to do creatively. I'm sure you had great reasons behind it.
Yeah, well, I guess the explanation has to do with the fact that I came into the instrumental angle by accident. I was in a band called The Squares, where I was like the second lead vocalist. I've never really been a real singer. I can vocalize, but my lead singer, Andy Milton, he was like a gifted real singer, like Sammy Hagar. They're just a special type. And so it was always a bit difficult for me to step up to the mic and sing. I was making instrumental records for myself. When Steve insisted on connecting me with Cliff Coltrane at Relativity, I thought it was the longest of long shots ever. But all of a sudden, I had a hit record. I'm playing with Mick Jagger, and people want me to do more of it. And I thought, well, this is great fun, and I don't have to sing. So I felt kind of relieved. But my manager, Mick Brigden, said something to me one day when I was recording the Flying in a Blue Dream album. He said, if you've got something to say, then step up to the mic and sing it, But if you don't feel pressured that you need to sing for some sort of music business reason. And that was the best advice I got. So I looked and I thought, well, do I really want to sing a song like I Believe and Big Bad Moon and Ride? And I really felt compelled to do that. I had a good reason to do that. And so sometimes I approached it like, I think my audience knows I'm singing in character. I'm not trying to be a lead singer. Everybody knows I'm not a lead singer. So I'm doing this just to make the album more interesting, to broaden the canvas for me to play guitar on, because the guitar playing that I could play on a song like Strange or I Believe, very different than if it was an instrumental. I'd have to kind of rein it in a little bit more. But having vocals to bounce off of gives you an extra freedom, I think, to express yourself. So I never thought that the vocals would ever like open a new door commercially for me, because over and over again, I get reminded that I'm not a singer. And I can tell you this one story that was just so perfect. We're recording the first Chickenfoot record, and we did a lot of background vocals together. And one day we're recording at George Lucas's studio, and we go out there to sing around one microphone, and we do one take, and engineer comes on the headphone and says, okay, Sammy, could you step back about 3 feet? Okay. And Joe, could you step up about 2 feet? Right. And anyway, long story short, by the time we get the balance right, I'm like this close to the microphone. Sammy's like back there. Chad is like 3 feet behind me. Mike, of course, is like in the other room. I mean, this goes to show you that real singers have a way of projecting, and I don't. We were cracking up so much, we could barely get the part recorded, because it was just so funny how small my voice actually was compared to Sammy. We had to put him like way back there. So I always remind myself when someone asks me to sing, I go, oh no, come on, let's forget about it.
Yeah. So Joe, for me, it was a very freeing experience to listen to vocal-free instrumental guitar music. When I found in 1992 the Extremist album, that became a complete game changer for me. So I then went back and found the other albums, but it always stood out. Besides the sometimes overwhelming personality of a voice, it sometimes hijacks the song, and that's just not possible if it's instrumental. So I truly enjoyed that. Thank you for that.
Well, you're very welcome, and you illustrate a very good point. The instrumental music really gives freedom to the listener to put their own story into the music, and that's why it's always been, for as long as history records people making music, instrumental music has been a driving force in all societies around the world. It's a big deal. It doesn't work as well with this visual medium, that we're in right now, where it's all about people looking into the camera and singing, and talking and doing whatever. But it won't go away because of that thing that you mentioned. It allows people to put their own story into the music, and it becomes their own that way. So thank you for liking that record. I put a lot of work into that album.
That's cool. You've been a pioneer in obviously the whole genre of guitar-driven solo albums as well. So thank you, Joey, for asking that question.
Thanks,
I'm
Joey.
going to
Nice to meet you.
Nice to
see you, man. Have a good one. So that's getting the hook. Actually, our producer gives them the hook, and that's Vic. That's Vic's hook right there. But we're gonna have Nick come up real quick and ask a question, and hopefully it'll be as good of a question as that. I have no pressure on you, Nick, to come up with a good question now, because Joey came up with a good one. But how you doing, Nick? Nice to see you, bud.
Hey,
I'm doing great, Ron. Great to see you, Joe. Nice to meet you, man. Hey, huge fan since I saw you back in the late 80s on the Surfing with the Alien tour. You played Fort Wayne. It was a great show.
Wow,
but
cool.
My question was, what was the most difficult aspect of making that Surfing with the Alien album, as far as musically?
The album was made on such a small budget. The original budget was $13,000, and these records were made analog, so we had to go to a studio and rent time. It's not like working with your laptop at home or something. So it's expensive, the old way of making records. The budget had to be eventually doubled and more. I think we eventually spent 29 grand of actual cash, but there was another, I'd say 15 grand that was all done really bartering. I did a lot of sessions for Sandy Perlman and Blue Oyster Cult in the same studio room, where we would take over and record a solo or rhythm part after I'd spent 6 hours working for Blue Oyster Cult repairing guitar parts. The studio owner, Michael Ward, also would hire me for sessions, and they would pay me in studio time. So I'd work for either Michael or Sandy, and if I worked for 3 hours, they'd give me 3 hours studio time, and then John and I would run in like between midnight and 8 a.m. or something, and we use that bartered studio time to do the sound effects on Circles, or the solo on Lords of Karma, or whatever we had to do. So everything was done under duress. The other day I was telling a story about the melody, and that goes all the way through the title track, Surfing with the Alien, and ends the song, the whammy bar and the wah-wah pedal. You have to imagine I had an afternoon to do that. I hadn't used my wah-wah pedal for years. I brought it to the studio that day. I plug it in. I tell John, let's just try something different. We get a sound. We realize it's 4 o'clock. There's guys standing at the door, literally with their arms folded, looking at us like, hey man, it's ours now. You get out of here. And we're like, let me just do one pass, so I can get this down. And I recorded that take while these people are looking at me, trying to get me to get out of the studio. Right after that, the eventide 9:49 or 9:11, whatever, breaks. We could never reconstruct the sound, so that wound up on the album, and that's kind of like how the whole album was put together. Lots of twists and turns. When we mastered the record the first time, we found out that the stereo bus at the studio was misaligned, so we went back and we made the studio give us free studio time to remix side one. This is crazy stuff, And all this time, relativity is screaming at me because I'm way over budget and took too much time. But actually we didn't. We couldn't get into the studio. We never had lockout time. So it was just 3 hours on Monday, and we wait till Friday, and we do 4 hours, and we wait till next Thursday, and we do 2 hours. So, I got to say, wonderful times, but at the time, very stressful, extremely stressful. And
I can imagine.
When you say that there were challenging aspects, when you say there's a few challenging aspects of surfing with the alien, that was actually a perfect question because it seems to be like there was many.
Well, it was a fantastic album, and it was well worth it.
Thank you.
At least from the fan standpoint. Love it. Love all your work, man. Appreciate it. Great meeting you.
I am very grateful that you love the record, that you listened to it. John Cuniberti, my good friend and engineer, it was such a driving force in helping me get that record done. He was my co-producer, and he sat there with me and had to work out all these issues as they were flying at us. So kudos to John as well.
People don't really realize the story behind the story of these albums, and I'm glad you're able to share it with us here. Thanks, Nick. Thanks for coming on and asking that question.
Thanks,
That's
Ryan.
amazing,
Appreciate
man.
it. Joe,
have a good one, man.
Thanks, Nick. Bye.
Hey, well, dude, I'm telling you, that's I didn't know that story. I mean, thank you for refreshing our memory with that. I mean, because it does. There are so many stories behind the story when you think about an album and what it goes to making it. And I wish everything was documented, because back in those days there wasn't all these social medias and platforms you would have just maybe made that an Insta story during back in those days, like, oh, hey, we're getting kicked out of our studio. But now you're able to share it with us right now. I think that's really awesome. We have one more question, if you want, for Adam to come up and Adam, do you want to come up and ask a question? And this is Adam. And
hey, Adam, how you doing?
Meet Joe. Joe, meet Adam. I'll go off.
All right.
Great to meet you, and great conversation so far. Thank you for this.
You're welcome.
So I want to ask you about creativity. So I'm a non-musician, and for someone like me, it's very difficult to fully imagine how a new and original piece of music really comes into existence. And I know that for some artists, they describe the experience of creativity, the subjective experience, as one of having inspiration and in a way that seems kind of out of their control and difficult to explain. Whereas for others, it seems like they have a reliable process that allows them to create innovative material, seemingly in some cases on demand. And so I wanted to ask you about your process. What is creativity like, and what is your process like in writing music?
Yeah, that's a great, very deep question. The one that I don't have a definitive answer for, because like most artists, I'm almost superstitious about looking at it. It's like I almost don't want to know. I don't want to look under the hood to see what's going on that creates that fantastic wealth of creativity. I've been blessed with being very prolific, and I don't want to jinx it by looking at it too closely. But I can say you hit on 2 points that were really interesting. Number one, I'm just a human being like you, so I'm just filled with emotions and questions. Being alive it's visceral, it's intellectual, it's spiritual, it's emotional, and there isn't enough time in the day to re-express it into music. But I focus on things. Sometimes they're so big, I can't help myself from expressing it artistically, like losing a loved one, or falling in love, or experiencing great joy or happiness. Sometimes I use my imagination to take a small feeling and blow it out of proportion. The first time that really worked for me was when, going back many years, my wife called me and she said, "You know what? I'm sorry, I got to work late. I won't be back for dinner." And it was just one of those normal things, like, yeah, no problem. And then I thought, I'm sitting there with my guitar and I'm thinking, what if that scenario was really bad? What would happen if I amplified that whole thing? What if the phone call was more intense? And what if my loneliness was more intense? How would that sound? And I knew I was just playing, with it. I was just making it up, but I put it towards the guitar and I came up with a song called The Crush of Love. And it became a very important song for my career at the time, even though it had no album. It was really funny. It came in between 2 albums. But it was proof that, there's part of who you are truthfully, and that part that you've developed, in other words, the musician part, can come together, and one can help the other or influence the other at times. I've had to address your other question, I've had to be able to turn things on before, because we had to do it. Like being in the studio with Chickenfoot, there's a lot of writing that would happen right at the moment where you're just looking at each other and they want to record, and you just have to come up with stuff at the moment. I think one of the great things about that is that those moments of necessity bring out the talent that you've been working on your whole life. We earlier in this interview, we talked about being prepared for good luck, and that's kind of like what it is. If you do all the hard work and just catalog it back there'll be that one day where Sammy Hagar will say, I got this song, I got this chord and this chord, but where do I go with it? And you go, I can run with that idea. I've got all this stuff that's sitting here waiting to be utilized. And you turn it on, you bring it out. You have to have the spirit in you. You have to love music, want to do it. You have to love collaboration. I happen to love that. I really like working with people. I like getting ideas from other people and working with them. So that winds up being a source of positive energy during those moments where you have to turn it on, Overall, the creative experience really surprises me. Yesterday, I was taking a break working on a session, and I played a bunch of demos that I had written about a month ago and sent off to my buddies in the band. And I marveled at the intensity of each one of the songs because I'd sort of forgotten the story behind it. Enough time had passed where I'd been working on some other music, and I got to listen to that. And I thought, wow, what made me feel that way so intensely that I would write that song. And I was, I thank the universe, for like gifting me that, because I had this beautiful gem of a representation of that feeling, that moment. And I wish I could explain it better, but I'm in awe of it. Creativity. It's my whole life. My passion in life is creativity, and I wish I could bottle it and give it away for free. But,
I think you've answered it. I think you've answered it like as eloquently as you can. And Adam, that's a great question, and I'm glad that I've got that insight. Again, I'm going to be using the rewind button on a lot of this podcast for myself, because it's been so inspiring. But thank you very much, Adam.
Thank you. It's a great answer. Thank you.
See you, man. Wow, man. I you know what? During your last couple questions with our guests, I've changed. You're not a guitar teacher. You're a sensei. Okay. you just might want to start growing that big, long white beard right now so you can be the guitar sensei.
I used to have a fake one that I could put on, like when I talked to John Petrucci on FaceTime, but don't have it around here.
That's funny. Well, I mean, I would love to talk all day, but we're going to wrap things up just a little bit. I know you have a busy schedule, but because I wanted, I'm a gear geek, and I would love to talk about. I know you still have, your signature series, JS Ibanez's that are out, and you have your JS, you have your signature Marshalls. I'm not sure if is PV still in the mix right now, or what are the amps of choice that you are using these days with guitars?
Well, outside of my relationship with Ibanez, I'm a free agent when it comes to pedals and amps and stuff like that. My favorite amp of all time is my JVM. It's over here. You can't really see it, can you? There it is on top of the 5150.
look at that.
Sorry.
Is that a JVM? But that's not the blue Tolex. That doesn't have the Joe Satriani. See, I know your blue Tolex.
That one's safely wrapped up because it looks so beautiful. But this one's been on the road, and I've been using that on the 5150 to do a lot of recording. I've got the Waza TAE here, which is really cool. Use it together with the Axio. I just put out something with Amplitude, a whole suite of sounds, which has been so much fun. We're just about to release a song, actually, which is like a freaky demo where I kind of plagiarized myself for about 4 minutes. and I just sort of like do 4 bars of this, 4 bars of that, it was a lot of fun doing it and just using, the laptop and the Axio and the Amplitude Joe Satriani suite. It was fun, but I love my 5150, the old one. Like I said, that my JVM signature, they don't actually make it anymore, but I've got a stash of them, and I just love playing that amp. I just really like it. I've got some old amps, old Marshalls. I love the new Fenders, all the small combos, just great. Their hand-wired series and their custom series, fantastic in the studio. Princeton's, Deluxes, all that stuff, really fantastic. Pedals. I've got so many pedals you can't even, it looks really clean this way. But if you can see down there, you'd be like, where do I walk? There's just like pedals everywhere.
I love it. There's not a phase shifter down there, is there? Like we talked about earlier.
I love, I'm a big fan of Eddie Van Halen and
with the Phase 90, right? Wasn't that the original one? Was
really great. That's how, the first single from Shapeshifting was a song called 1980. And that was all about just me being so excited about playing guitar again in a rock band. And the fact that there was somebody like Eddie that came along and kind of invented and reinvigorated playing aggressive guitar. And, he's a master, and so I thought it was a tip of the hat to plug in that pedal. I hadn't planned on it, but I was sitting here recording that song and I thought, there's the pedal. And I thought, well, of course, it's just.
Were you like me? Did you, because kids today don't realize how lucky they are with YouTube to have a speed control already on the player, to have everything that you can break down track by track. But were you like me? Did you actually ruin a bunch of copies of Van Halen 1 trying to learn Eruption? Because I used to do it with the needle on the thing, and I tried to get it, but then I would slow it down to not 33. I'd slow it down to 16 speed, but that wouldn't work. Did you try and learn records? Try and learn songs?
I had to. I was teaching guitar from late 78 to 80 to early 88. Kirk Hammett was my last lesson in January of 88. And for 10 years, I had to show all those young kids, from Yngwie to Eddie Van Halen, Michael Schenker, Stevie Ray Vaughan, Hendrix, all of it. So, I just had to learn how everybody did everything. But to tell you the truth,
mentioned something about ear training. Ear training is so important. It's what I try to give my students all the time as well. It's always ear training. I
have to tell you this because it really explains the way I feel about the way Eddie played and what it meant, which is, this goes back maybe 2 years. I'm sitting at a meet and greet with Phil Collin and John Petrucci, right? And they play music while we're meeting everybody. So we're signing stuff, meeting, we're talking about stuff. And, Eruption comes on. And at one point, John and I are just like stunned once again, since we were really young. We're just stunned once again. And we look at each other and we go, is that the most amazing feeling ever? And of course, we know how to play it inside out. We can play it in every key and whatever, but that's not the point. The point is, as a finished piece of music, it's the most beautiful expression from somebody who just had a vision and tried everything they could and put everything they had into making something really unique. And the fact that he did it is so important, and that the sound of it, you can feel there's some sort of weird magic voodoo in that thing that's got nothing to do with the finger technique. It's just Eddie, you know what I mean? And to this day, just sitting there in a professional setting, John and I, again, we hear it and our hearts are going gung, 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 and we can't we can't sign stuff. We can't shake hands. We have to wait till he's finished. We got to listen to the whole thing, you know. And Phil is there. We look at Phil and he's the same thing. We're just like,
I can tell you after I sign off today on this podcast, I will go listen to that because I'm excited to hear it. I will also go listen to the Squares album now that I know it's on Spotify. It's great. And of course, anybody that's in the chat right now should go check out satriani.com. In fact, it's time for you to give out your socials if you can, Joe, because a lot of people are probably listening on Apple and Spotify, and we thank you for that. But if you want to see it, you could see the handles right there. But Joe, if you want to tell them out for the people, how to get in touch with you and find out more.
Yeah, the best place, if you just type in my name, it'll come up, satriani.com will come up first. And then, of course, you'll see everything for the socials. The funniest one is Twitter, right? Because I signed on without calling my my webmaster many years ago, and I just, you know, I was thinking something funny. So I put Chickenfoot Joe. As people know, trying to get your real name and that blue check next to something can be a bit of a thing. But anyway, there is no problem finding embarrassing photos of me and everything else on the internet. So unfortunately, it's an open book. So yes, go to Instagram, go to Twitter, go to Spotify, go to Facebook. Satriani.com can direct you to all of that. And thank you if you do.
There you go. Well, you know what? The one last thing I have for you is a little thing that Alice Cooper says. He says, never let the truth get in the way of a good story. Yeah. All right. Never let the truth get in the way of a good story. So I just have a quick couple things to find out if they were fact or fiction that we came up with. And, I think you kind of almost answered the first one. 1986, did you almost go broke recording your debut album, Not of This Earth?
Yes.
Okay, so that is a fact.
Is this a yes, no kind of thing?
It was just fact or fiction because... And you did sort of play it. A follow-up question to that is 1987's Surfing with the Alien was based on a real life experience?
No. It was okay. So Surfing with the Alien is a title of a song I just thought in my head. I was just thinking, like, I love science fiction, and I thought, how come when the aliens show up, it's always they want to eat us, they want to cook us, they want our water, they want to blow up the planet. I said, what if they come and they just want to have fun? So what would you do? And I thought, oh, what if I said, hey, you want to go surfing? That's a lot of fun if you're a human. And the alien says, yeah. So I thought, okay, I'm going to write a song that's about that, surfing with the alien. It was just one of those funny little daydreams that I focused on, you know? So, but that wasn't the title of the album. The album was supposed to be called Lords of Karma. And in the summer before the record gets released, it was released in October of 87. I did my first interview. And the British journalist at the end said, love the album, great work, hate the title. And, you know, he said, I don't understand why guitarists always go into some sort of Indian spiritual thing and I didn't know why he was upset. But after I hung up, I called the record company and I said, can we change the title? And they said, well, yeah, we haven't pressed anything yet. So I looked at the song list and I said, okay, Surfing with the Alien, everyone will know I have a sense of humor and I'm not taking myself seriously. Can we just call it that? And so I'm talking to Jim Kozlowski.
One little thing. You have an uptight British journalist to thank for the success of your entire career. No, it didn't go that way.
So here's the totally random fact about this whole conversation. The guy I'm talking to at the record company is production manager Jim Kozlowski, who's like 6'4". He's got long platinum blonde hair. He used to work at radio in Boston. And he says to me, Surfing with the Alien, great idea. We should put my namesake on the cover. And I said, I don't know what you're talking about. And he says, the Silver Surfer. That's what they used to call me on Boston radio station.
That was a comic strip or something too, right?
That's right. I didn't know that because my parents never allowed me to read comic books, right? So I said to him, look, Jim, I don't know what you're talking about. And he says, the Silver Surfer. He goes, I'll send you a copy of so you can see this thing. Now, you should know, in my contract, I had stipulated no negative images violent images, anything on any of my album covers. It was something that I was adamant about because Relativity and Combat were doing great business with some of the most disgusting looking album covers I'd ever seen in my life, right? Anyway, I got to make this story short, I know. So he sends me the first 2 issues of the 1968 comic, The Silver Surfer. Of course, I love Norrin Radd, the Silver Surfer, the fact that he's metaphysically tortured and the love story, the whole thing. And I thought, well, that's really great, but how are we going to get that? And he goes, I know the guys at Marvel, their office is right down the block from my apartment. So he lives in Manhattan. So he goes down there after work. He says, I got an instrumental artist. We'd like to use some artwork. And they said, anything, help, because the Silver Surfer was kind of dead in the water as a character. This is before the Marvel movies started up, right? So we were able to get, for I think $5,000 for 20 years, a license to use the real artwork from the very first issue where the Silver Surfer is born out of the hand of Galactica. So that's how that happened. It was all because of that one interview.
And now you're set, because you know that Marvel's going to come. They're going to run out of characters at one point. So Silver Surfer is going to be a new Marvel character. And of course, it's probably, you're going to have all the music in that. You're set.
Well, no, it didn't work out that way at all. As a matter of fact, decade after decade, they put the screws on so bad. And last year, they finally came and made an offer that I could not accept. It was so beyond servitude, and the amount of money they wanted was just ridiculous. So they forced me to stop using the artwork, and we had to come up with our own artwork. So we reissued the album with new artwork last year, and we included a double vinyl package with the backing tracks. And that was the beginning of me releasing backing tracks, which ties into the stripped ×3 release that we're doing now. So yeah, it's really weird because this is still, you know, the whole thing about the silver guitar and you know,
it all goes back to that theme.
Yeah, it's still a thing. It's so weird that it happened to me. You know, it's just so
$5,000 was well spent. And remember, it was $5,000 that you owed on that credit card for the very first album as well. So
that's pretty funny, isn't it?
Last Fact or Fiction, Never Let the Truth Get in the Way of Story. You played all the guitars on the debut Crowded House album.
Oh my God, no.
So that's fiction. But
I sang backup vocals on 6 songs on Crowded House's debut album. The producer Mitchell Froome was considering producing the Squares at the time. And when he got the job to produce Crowded House, he called Andy Milton, the Squares lead singer, and myself and said, I'd love to get you 2 guys to come down to LA and sing backup with the band, because you guys have a unique blend and no one's heard it before yet. You know, you don't sound like the
such
pros.
A great debut record. That's such a great record.
Wonderful. And my good friend Andy Milton, not with us anymore, but his voice is so beautiful and it's so obvious on that album. He basically sang with Neil and harmonized and doubled his parts. I sang with the drummer, also unfortunately not with us anymore. Our range was similarly small. We both had, I think he sang better than I did. He didn't really like singing.
No guitars. So it's fiction on the guitars, but your voice was featured on there, and there you go.
It is, in fact, the only time I have ever been paid to sing on somebody else's record.
You got paid for Chickenfoot, didn't you?
Well, you know, that's not really getting paid, you know, because we financed those records ourselves. So we were our own boss. So, but that was the only time I got hired as a singer, you know what I mean? And got paid and
scale, double scale,
scale, whatever it was at the time. Anything was okay. Dinner would have been fine. You know,
you know what? I try to bring one thing that perhaps Joe Satriani fans didn't know before, and I think that might be the one thing that you did sing on the Crowded House album, which is a great album. But the Squares album is a great album as well. So you should go check out that, and go check out Satriani.com so you can get the new Shapeshifting record as well as Strip ×3. So we've been hanging out, folks, with Joe Satriani. I finally said the name right. I'm getting the East Coast vibe of it. It's been nothing but inspirational hanging with you. As you can see, halfway through your questions, I grabbed my Les Paul.
Excellent.
I'm going to go play and listen to some music today. I'm sure you're going to do the same because you're in your music room. So thanks enough. Thank you so much, Joe, for being on, and thanks for everybody for coming on this secret sauce episode of In the Trenches with Ryan Roxie. And Joe, any parting words that you might like to have?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on the show. The show is really great. I love the format. It's really nice that you give everybody a lot of room to tell their stories. I apologize if my answers are a bit long-winded, but
not at all. No, that's what we want. Long term, man. That was great, and so many things that I think people didn't hear in other places. They got to hear, today. I didn't know a lot of these stories, and I did my research on this, so it was great talking with you. Hopefully, we can do it again.
Yes, please do. Please invite me back. I'll be ready for you.
All right, guys. Well, until next time, Joe Satriani, Ryan Roxie, live in the trenches, secret sauce episodes. We'll see you next time. Enjoy the ride,
everybody.